I live in Washington, in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I used to work at a late-night diner by the highway. At 29 years old, I often worked the closing shift, which usually meant a lot of quiet hours and a handful of customers. The diner would close its doors at 2 o'clock, which felt incredibly late, especially since the area isn't very populated. But because it was right off the highway, we usually had at least 1 or 2 customers until closing time. Having grown up in the South and then moving up here, I can tell you that the people are different. In the South, hospitality is a big deal. People love to chat and make small talk, which can make you feel warm and welcome. But here in Washington, people are kind, but they're not overly friendly. It feels like the atmosphere encourages people to be a bit more introverted. Before moving here, I worked as a waitress back home, and I can honestly say that the customers in the South were a lot chattier. Up here, folks seem to want to keep to themselves. As the clock approached closing time, I knew the kitchen's last call was at 2 o'clock. Even though the diner was advertised to close at 2, it wasn't great for customers to come in and order that late. Still, it happened sometimes. Tonight was one of those nights. Around 1:50 a.m., a heavy-set man walked into the diner. He was wearing high jeans that seemed a bit awkward, a gray shirt tucked into a brown jacket, and he had a brown mustache and glasses. I greeted him and asked if he wanted to sit at the bar or at a table. He opted for a table, and he kept smiling at me. I smiled back, thinking he seemed harmless enough. I handed him a menu and mentioned that the kitchen would close in 10 minutes. He glanced at the menu for a moment before ordering black coffee and French toast. As he ordered, he introduced himself as Nolan. Luckily, his order was simple enough, so I headed into the kitchen to tell the chef. He raised an eyebrow at the late order, and I just shrugged, knowing we were both thinking the same thing. When I returned to the dining area, Nolan waved me over. He started a conversation, which was pretty unusual for customers at this hour. He asked if I was from around here and began complaining about all the potholes in the road. I agreed, saying it was due to the winter freezes. I told him I was from around the area, but kept my answer vague. I never share exactly where I live with strangers. Nolan said he had just moved to town, and as he spoke, I analyzed his body language. He seemed like a somewhat nerdy older guy, and I wondered if this was his idea of flirting. It didn't bother me much. I had dealt with that kind of attention back home all the time, so I was used to it. Since he was the last customer of the night, the chef came out to personally place his food on the counter. I took the order and brought it to Nolan. By this point, he had everything he ordered, and I was ready to wrap up my shift. I wiped down the counters and tables, keeping my distance because I was tired and eager to get home and go to sleep. When Nolan finished his food, I dropped off his check before he even asked for it. I was trying to non-verbally signal that we were closed and wanted to head home. He paid by card and then left. After cleaning up his table, I gathered my belongings and said goodbye to the chef. I stepped outside to my car and noticed there were 3 cars in the parking lot: mine, the chef's, and a third car that I couldn't explain. It was a silver, older-looking car, maybe a 2005 Toyota or Audi. I couldn't tell if the windows were tinted or if it was just too dark to see inside. I wondered if it was Nolan's car. I got in my car and started driving home. The diner was about a 20-minute drive from my place. As I cruised along the highway, I heard a ding from my dashboard and the tire pressure light flashed on. Panic set in. I didn't know how to change a tire. I had never even called my roadside assistance service before. I was still a decent way from home, and I could feel the tire pressure in my rear passenger side tire dropping quickly. It went from 20 to 10, and then I felt not just the steering wheel shaking, but the entire car vibrating. I had to pull off the road to avoid losing control. I came to a stop and jumped out of the car to check the tire. Sure enough, it was completely flat. Just as I was trying to figure out what to do, I saw headlights approaching from behind. A car slowed down next to me, and I hurried back inside my car and locked the door. I felt uneasy and didn't know what to expect. Then there was a light tap on my window. I looked up and saw Nolan standing there, waving at me with a smile. Now he was wearing gloves. "Kathy, is that you? Are you okay?" he asked, laughing like it was just a funny coincidence. A knot formed in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. I knew he was up to something. He motioned for me to roll down the window, so I opened it just enough to talk. "I have a flat tire," I told him. He feigned ignorance and asked which tire. I replied, "The back passenger side." He walked around to check that side of the car, and that's when I quickly dialed 911, setting my phone on my lap. When he returned, his creepy smile was still there. He offered to help change the tire, but I told him I was waiting for my boyfriend to come help me. As I talked to the 911 operator, I tried to communicate my situation clearly without letting Nolan know. I told her I wasn't sure how I got a flat and that I was waiting for my boyfriend. Nolan stood there for a moment, his friendly demeanor fading. He walked away from my window, and I seized the chance to quietly tell the operator that this man had slashed my tire and was trying to get me out of the car. She asked for my location, so I quickly opened the map on my phone and gave her the name of the road. Then, without warning, I heard a loud crash as glass shattered to my left. I screamed as shards of glass rained down onto my lap. "I'm on the phone with the police," I yelled, showing him my phone screen. He glanced at it, then suddenly reached into my car. I screamed again, terrified he would grab me or worse. Instead, he snatched my phone and hurled it toward the highway. Then, without a word, he dashed back to his car and sped off, tires screeching as he made a sharp turn and vanished into the darkness. I wanted to look for my phone, but realized I couldn't do it in the pitch dark. The only light came from my car, and I felt I had to stay put and hope Nolan wouldn't come back. I was grateful I managed to tell the 911 operator my location just in time. The sound of police sirens grew closer, and relief washed over me as they approached. I got out of my car and waved my arms until I saw the flashing lights turn off the highway and onto the road where I was parked. Soon, a second police car arrived, followed by a third. While they searched for my phone, which was now destroyed, I described Nolan to them. including what he looked like and the car he drove. One officer left to chase after him, while they also radioed for assistance. The officers were incredibly nice. They changed my tire for me, and one even offered to drive me home, following behind his patrol car. He reassured me that they would investigate the diner's surveillance footage and keep me updated. A week later, I received a call from one of the officers. He said the investigation was still ongoing and that they hadn't caught Nolan yet. That was the last I heard about it. I didn't return to that diner job after that night. The experience shook me up too much, and I didn't want to risk that man ever finding me again. Underscore 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 underscore. After this encounter, I found it hard to feel safe. The memory of that night haunted me. I was cautious everywhere I went, and I often glanced over my shoulder, especially when I was out at night. I learned to appreciate the kindness of the police who helped me, but I also realized how quickly things can turn scary. Eventually, I decided to find a new job. I didn't want to be in a place that reminded me of that experience. I started working at a local grocery store during the day. It was much calmer, and I felt a little more secure. I also made sure to avoid night shifts and kept my car in good shape to prevent any more flat tires. Even now, I still remember that night vividly. Every time I see a silver car on the road, my heart races a little. I've learned to be more aware of my surroundings and not take my safety for granted. Though the experience was terrifying, it taught me a valuable lesson about trust and awareness. I pointed to the hill on my right and smiled. The man nodded and began walking that way, but I noticed he kept turning to look back at me. I was feeling more freaked out than ever, but I tried to avoid eye contact. It was hard not to feel nervous, especially since he seemed so fixated on me. Just then, one of my coworkers came over to take my place, and I seized the opportunity. I grabbed my things and practically sprinted through the park, anxious to get to the back room where I could clock out of my shift. Once inside, I rushed to the bathroom and quickly changed out of my work clothes. I headed to the employee parking lot, heart still racing. I sat on a bench, trying to calm down while waiting for my coworker, Jordan. He was 17, a good friend of mine, and he was supposed to pick me up. It felt like I waited for hours, but finally he arrived. "Hey, ready to go?" Jordan asked, a smile on his face. "Yeah, let's get out of here," I replied, still a little shaken. Before heading home, we decided to stop at the local diner for cheeseburgers. It felt good to chat and distract myself from the day's events. While we were eating, I noticed something odd. The same man I helped find the bathrooms at the park was sitting just a few tables down, staring directly at me. My heart skipped a beat. I leaned over to Jordan and whispered, "That guy from the park is here, and he's looking right at me." Jordan shrugged it off, saying, "It's probably just a coincidence. Don't worry about it." But even though I tried to convince myself he was right, I felt a knot in my stomach. After dinner, we got back in the car for the 35-minute drive home. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. But as soon as we hit the first red light, I saw him again. There he was, sitting in a white Honda next to us, staring back at me. Panic surged through me. I turned to Jordan, saying, "He's right there." Jordan's face shifted from casual to concerned. "Okay, let's keep driving," he replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. When we arrived at my street, I insisted we take a couple of laps around the block to make sure the man wasn't following us. My heart raced the whole time, and I felt like I couldn't breathe until we confirmed he was gone. Finally, after a few cautious turns, Jordan dropped me off at home. I stepped inside, feeling both relieved and anxious. My mom and sister were out at the mall, and my dad was away on a business trip, leaving me home alone. I jumped into bed, hoping to shake off the fear, but then I heard a strange noise at my window. My heart dropped. Slowly, I got up and peeked outside. What I saw made chills run down my spine. The man was standing on my front lawn, smiling at me. I felt paralyzed, my heart pounding in my chest. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but when the police arrived a short while later, the man was gone. Terrified and shaken, I decided to quit my job at the amusement park the next day. Winter was approaching, and the park would close soon anyway, but I knew I couldn't go back after that. I hadn't seen the man since that night, but the experience was burned into my memory, one I would never forget. Underscore 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 underscore. A few weeks later, I was working a late shift at the diner where I had been employed for a year. It was a rainy night, and the downpour usually meant fewer customers. I expected a slow night, and for the most part, it was. I was set to work until midnight, and as I cleaned tables, I thought about how nice it would be to go home to a warm bed. Just before my shift was set to end, a man and a younger woman entered the diner. The man looked to be about 40, while the woman seemed to be in her 20s. The moment they walked in, they both turned to look at me. I approached them with a smile. "Hi there, welcome. How many?" I asked cheerfully. "Just two," the man replied, and I led them to a table. They took their time ordering, and I noticed they were speaking quietly to each other. After they finally placed their order, the man started chatting with me. I'm a naturally talkative person, which has always helped me in the hospitality industry, so I began making small talk with them. "Is it usually busy here on rainy nights?" he asked. I laughed lightly. "Not really. Most people prefer to stay home when it's pouring out." The girl didn't say much. The man was doing most of the talking. I directed most of my questions to him, trying to keep the conversation going. I can't remember every detail, but one question he asked stuck with me. "Do you live alone?" At that moment, I didn't see anything wrong with the question. I answered honestly, saying I lived about 10 minutes north up the road. I mentioned that it could be quiet and a little boring sometimes. I made a joke about being stuck there forever and walked away from their table to check on other customers. About 45 minutes later, they finished eating and left. I waved goodbye as they walked out. Fast forward about an hour, and we were closing up for the night. I said goodbye to my coworkers, eager to get home and out of the rain. I rushed to my car, trying to avoid getting soaked. Once I was inside, I drove home carefully because the rain was still heavy. As soon as I arrived, I dashed to the front door and let myself in. That's when I noticed something strange. Neither of my roommates' cars was parked outside. I lived on the middle floor of a house divided into 3 apartments. There was a side entrance with a staircase leading to all the floors. I entered through the front door and set my keys down on the kitchen counter. Just then, I heard a frantic pounding at my front door. It was nearly 1 o'clock, and I had no idea who it could be. I opened the inner door cautiously, only to see a girl outside on the other side of the storm door. She was drenched and wearing a gray hoodie that obscured part of her face. "Please let me in," she begged, her voice shaky. "I need to use a phone." I hesitated for a moment, wanting to be cautious. "Are you lost?" I asked. "Yes, a creepy man is following me. I need help." Something about her seemed familiar. I squinted, trying to remember. "Who is the man? Where is he now?" She turned around and said, "I don't know." She was desperate, begging me to open the door. Then it hit me, she looked like the girl who was with the man at the diner. "Weren't you at my diner earlier?" I asked, my heart racing. But she didn't answer. Maybe she didn't hear me, but she kept looking back at the street, panicking. Suddenly, she screamed, "There he is!" I glanced outside and saw a large man slowly walking toward the house. My blood ran cold as I recognized him, the man from the diner. He got closer, and I could see the girl looking at me, confusion in her eyes, as if she was wondering why I hadn't opened the door yet. The man moved nearer, and the girl turned to him, yelling, "Go!" As he charged toward the door, I slammed the inner door shut and locked it. I held my breath, listening for any sounds. It was eerily quiet. I didn't hear any knocks or bangs. I was too terrified to check if they were still there. Quickly, I ran to the stairway to knock on the door of the upstairs tenant. I banged on the door repeatedly, but no one answered. I tried the same thing at the downstairs door, but still no answer. Panic began to rise in my chest. Feeling helpless, I looked out the windows and realized that none of the other tenants' cars were parked outside tonight. It dawned on me that I was completely alone, and that thought made my heart race even faster. What was I going to do? I had to stay safe and figure out my next move. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 again, hoping someone would come and help me before it was too late.